How to Escape a Kidnapping. For Kids. Chapter 2. Lesson 2. Allies. Summary. Get kidnapped enough, and you'll begin to recognize some familiar faces, ones that could be important allies. It's important to be well connected. By the time Izuku is 10, he's been around enough times to begin to meet a few other routine kidnappees. Unlike with Toshi, they've all been business, not very willing to chat with a kid while they escape to get back to their adult person lives. The ones that are quirkless, especially the younger ones, were more likely to talk with him, making sure he knows what he's doing and has heard of all the various quirkless forums. But after they know he's capable, they tend to just give him a smile and leave. But that changes when Izuku meets Nat for the first time. Izuku is thrown into a room. Literally, the woman who was carrying him had a gorilla quirk that allowed her to yeet his small body into the room. It was also how this group was able to get him in the first place. He had been out for a walk before school. Staying cooped up at home hadn't been an option that morning. He had too much energy. When he was picked up as he walked past the mouth of an alley, he'd like to consider himself pretty adept at avoiding and escaping capture, but when your kidnapper picks you up like a kitten with its scruff, there's not much you can do. Instead of being met with hard ground, he collides with a warm lump midair, a low oof coming from behind him as he was settled into strong arms. He heard the door as it clicked close, his face buried in the lump. "I gotcha," the lump, evidently a person, said, turning Izuku around so he was face to face with a younger teen. The boy had short white hair, warm gray eyes, and a humorous smile. If Izuku had to guess, he'd say the boy was 15, maybe 16? Izuku glanced down at his shoes. Thick red high tops. "Hey there," the teen said, placing Izuku back on his feet. "Hi," Izuku said before looking around the room. It was plain, tan walls and a stone floor. 3 other people with bright red shoes sat calmly in the small space, looking over Izuku appraisingly. The other 3 were adults, while he was very clearly a little kid. He knew he didn't quite look his age, so it was normal for people to be delicate with him in these situations. But he wasn't a helpless kid. Izuku turned back towards the teen when he started speaking again. "Looks like you're our 5th. "Huh?" Izuku questioned, tilting his head. "When they took me, I overheard them talking about having 4 other targets, and since I was the first, that means you're the last one. Which means we can finally get going." A blonde-haired adult let out a little cheer as they stood, cracking the kinks in their spine. "Finally! This one refused to leave anyone behind, including the people who haven't arrived yet," she said, gesturing to the white-haired teen. The boy rubbed the back of his neck with a guilty smile. "Sorry for making everyone wait." An older man waved him off. "It's fine. Let's just get going." The man crouched down by the door and pulled out a lockpick, seemingly from thin air, but Izuku knew plenty of people had little hidden pockets in their sleeves to keep their tools close. "So, what's your name?" the teen asked, drawing his attention away from the man. "I'm Izuku," he said brightly. "What's your name?" "Natsuo, but everyone just calls me Nat here. By here, I mean situations like this." Izuku nodded. It definitely seemed like the people here were more used to kidnappings than most. When the old man pushed the door open silently with practiced ease, Izuku knew he was in for an easy escape. Good, because he didn't want to be late for school today. No one would notice, but he didn't want to miss out on the science lesson today. "So," Nat whispered as they snuck through noisy halls. "You get in situations like this a lot?" Izuku liked Nat already. It didn't seem like he underestimated him like so many people tended to do. He seemed like the type of person who would help him hide a body. It was helpful to be underestimated when it came to kidnappers, but it could cause problems when other kidnappees didn't think he was capable. "Ever since I was 5, but I'm okay. Akka taught me what to do." "Orange hair, right?" Izuku nodded and Nat continued. I met her once a couple of years ago. She helped me out too. Izuku beamed. She's so cool, isn't she? He hadn't actually seen Akka since that fateful day, but he'd heard little anecdotes from others. It made him smile every time to know she was still out there, doing well. A pressure against his lip brought his focus back to the situation at hand. The blonde-haired woman had raised a finger to shush him, causing Izuku to blush embarrassedly. Escape now. Talk later. Got it. Still. Personal space, lady. The group expertly slunk through the halls, stopping periodically to listen out for footsteps. Izuku watched the older Quirkless folk with analytical eyes, trying to glean all they'd learned from over the years. He found his gaze naturally was drawn to Natsuo more than the others. He was the most calm and collected, despite his age. His steps were silent in a way that showed years of consistent practice. It was to a level, however, which made Izuku think that kidnappings weren't the only time he had to move around unseen. Izuku wondered about his life outside of kidnappings, as he'd taken to doing. Without quirks to analyze, he had to find a different way to keep his mind occupied on these outings. He'd even read some books on psychology and habits and body languages to try to give him more clues to theorize with. Even though it was so unlike quirk analysis, Izuku found he liked it. Nowhere close to as much as quirks, but it was fun enough he found himself doing it outside of kidnappings on multiple occasions. From what Izuku could tell, despite Nat's wide frame, something that would generally make him stand out on the principle that he took up more space, he was easily able to blend into the background, like he'd been doing it his whole life, whether he wanted to or not. It wasn't too uncommon for the Quirkless. You either fade into the background or get crucified in front of the crowd, but something about it was different than what he'd seen in others and himself. He couldn't place a finger on it. The group soon came upon a window. Izuku lifted onto his tiptoes. It looked like a 2-story drop. Not too bad. One of the adults, a young woman in business attire, finished inspecting it with a shake of her head. It didn't look like it had any way to open, but that wouldn't stop them. Once I break it, we need to go quickly, the old man said. I'll go first, then the 2 kids. You 2 follow behind. Everyone nodded, though Izuku was miffed at being referred to as a kid, even if it was technically true. Nat seemed to share the sentiment, but got ready nonetheless. The old man took out what Izuku recognized as a glass-breaking tool. He'd seen them used a couple of times, and even had gotten one of his own. He didn't keep it on him, though. It was more for when Toshi needed a save and he had time to grab it. Too bulky with the rest of his tools. The window shattered with one hit, sprinkling the ground in shards. The resounding crack was bound to draw attention, even with the noise level of the building, but they'd be long gone before anyone got here. The old man vaulted out of the opening with surprising grace. As soon as he was clear, Izuku took his cue and hauled himself up and out. He felt a sudden stinging burn on his forearm, but he couldn't focus on that right now. He was currently falling towards the ground. The angle he jumped out at was one he'd practiced many times, one that helped spread out the impact as he rolled across grating concrete. He didn't even pause as he used the momentum to spring up and follow the old man's lead down the shaded alleys. He heard 3 thuds behind him, signaling the others were right on their heels. Still, Izuku glanced back, just in case. Sure enough, the others were following close behind. Nat quickly gained on Izuku. Curse his little legs. Settling his pace beside him. You're pretty fast, he shouted out with a grin. Not as fast as you. He pouted as he made a hairpin turn, air whipping through his locks. Nat chuckled. Nah, this is like as fast as I get. You're much faster than I was at your age. You're like, what, 8? Izuku let out an exaggerated, offended gasp. I'm 10. How old are you? 20? Natsuo let out an even more strangled and offended gasp. I'm 14, you little menace. That surprised Izuku. He definitely looked older, but then again, Izuku looked younger than he actually was. The teen, unlike most of the 14-year-olds he'd seen, had a healthy bulk of muscle on his arms. He also had this air of maturity around him, not in the way some of his classmates tried to portray, wanting to seem older, but one that spoke of experience and growing up too fast. "You're almost as bad as my younger brother," Nat scoffed, "except he doesn't even realize that he's doing it." They made another sharp turn. "At least, I don't think he is." Izuku tucked that little nugget of information away before he responded. "If you think I'm bad, you should hear Toshi. He's the one who corrupted me, after all." Izuku noticed that the old man was slowing down and followed suit. They had been sprinting for a few minutes, so he figured that they were far enough away to start splitting up. That made Izuku frown. He wanted to talk to Nat some more. He didn't connect often to other people he met during kidnappings. It was generally he and Toshi against the world, but Izuku liked Natsuo. He wanted to get to know him better. With just a nod, the adults silently parted ways, dipping out into the light of the street. Only he and Nat remained. "Guess it's time to go," the teen said. "It was nice meeting you. You're bleeding!" Natsuo reached his arms out, pulling Izuku's left arm away from where he'd been unconsciously cradling it. Thick blood was dripping down his forearm onto the gray concrete. That must have been the pain he felt before. He could hardly feel it now, despite the gash splitting his skin. "Ah," Izuku whined. "The blood's supposed to stay on the inside." Nat spluttered. "Izuku, dude, come on." He sighed deeply. "You're officially worse than my brother. Let's get you patched up." "I'm fine," Izuku tried to insist, as Natsuo led him to the ground. But the snow-haired boy didn't listen. "You're not fine. You've got a deep cut. Stitches would be best, but I'm not exactly allowed to do those yet, so butterfly bandage it is." Izuku watched as Nat pulled a thick first aid kit from out of his jacket pocket. There were so many things inside, things Izuku had never seen in a standard first aid kit before. Natsuo puffed out his chest at Izuku's clear interest. "I'm training to be a doctor, so I've got special stuff. It's pretty cool." He fished out a wipe and began cleaning Izuku's cut. Izuku nodded, eyes still looking over the kit. "It's super cool, but isn't getting into med school really hard being quirkless?" Nat seemed to deflate at what Izuku had thought was an innocent question. "Sorry, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to," Izuku spluttered. Natsuo sighed. "It's all right. It's just... Even though I'm quirkless, my father had enough money and influence to pay off the doctors to say I had a quirk. He didn't want me to disgrace the family name." "Oh," Izuku said. He didn't really know how to respond to that. Nat obviously didn't like that he was forced to pretend that he wasn't quirkless, but Izuku couldn't help thinking about not being hated at school if he'd been able to fake a quirk. Izuku shook himself. No, being quirkless was part of who he is. Plus, if everyone didn't know he was quirkless, he never would have met Toshi. He wouldn't give that up for people to like him. Why do you want to be a doctor?" That was probably a good distraction question, right? Like if someone asked him why he wanted to be a hero. "I want to help people who are hurt. My younger brother is going to be a hero, so I want to make sure I can help him stay safe. But mainly, I want to find a better way to help people like me." "How does being a doctor help quirkless people specifically?" Izuku asked. "Well," Nat smiled, "I found out about Red Door clinics a few years ago and have been studying medicine ever since. They finally let me help out when I turned 13, so I volunteer whenever I can." "Red Door clinics?" Izuku seemed to be asking a lot of questions today. Nat stilled in his bandage search. "You don't know about Red Door clinics?" the teen asked, looking up, baffled. "No. Should I?" "Yes," he declared, fishing out an oddly shaped tape thingy. "All the quirkless know about them." Izuku tried to cross his arms, but Nat held tight to his injured one. He just wanted to know what it was already. Izuku didn't like not knowing something. Nat spoke as he applied the bandage around the cut with practiced ease. It's a type of underground clinic, one that doesn't discriminate against anyone. So if you live in a bad discrimination area like Mustafu, there's someone you can go to get treated. All sorts of people go there, but the Quirkless make up the majority, so Red Door Clinic. That is so cool! Izuku exclaimed, stars in his eyes. Nat chuckled, packing back up his kit. I'm glad you think so. I personally think it's really cool. I can't wait to tell Toshi about this the next time we get kidnapped together. Izuku tried to dodge the incoming hand, but he couldn't escape the hair ruffle. That's one way to look on the bright side. Nat stood up, helping Izuku stand beside him. I should get going, but I hope I see you again, Izuku. His green hair bounced as he nodded. I need to get to school, but I hope I see you again too. Bye, Nat! The two of them stepped out into the street and walked in separate directions. Izuku really liked Nat. He was nice and funny and knew cool things. Maybe they would see each other again. Just a few months later, Izuku ran into Nat again. This time, with Toshi. It took a while, but as soon as that Spider-Man's... Izuku could not wait to analyze his quirk. Venom wore off, and he regained control of his body. Izuku cut through the silk cocoon he was cocooned in with one of his trusty pocket knives. While he didn't emerge as a beautiful butterfly, he did emerge into a dusty old janitor's closet, bordered by two other cocoons. One of them was wiggling a bit, so Izuku waited to see who would emerge from this one. He sat on the cramped floor next to a damp mop and watched as a purple-haired menace sliced their way through their cocoon. Toshi! Izuku cheered, helping Toshi out of their silky webs. It had been a good month since they'd last been kidnapped together, so Izuku had missed him. He hoped this kidnapping was one of the longer ones. Not for the first time. Izuku wished they could hang out outside of kidnappings, but they'd be too big a target. Maybe when they were older and heroes it would be different. Lavender eyes lit up at the familiar voice. Zuko, I missed you. Izuku pulled him into a bone-crushing hug. Who's that? Toshi asked, gesturing best he could, still trapped in Izuku's arms, to the remaining cocoon. I'm not sure, Izuku replied. Should we cut them open? Just then, the cocoon spoke in a familiar, yet muffled, voice. Yes, please, Izuku, said Nat. The venom is starting to wear off, but my knife is a little hard to reach. Toshi looked between the cocoon and Izuku, raising an eyebrow. You know him? Izuku nodded, twirling his knife into a cutting position before getting started. He's the one I told you about last time, you know, the one who works at the Red Door Clinic. The purple net hummed in understanding as Nat began to emerge. He eyed the older boy consideringly. Nice to meet you, Nat. I'm Hitoshi. Nat shook off the webs, still lounging on the floor, before turning to Toshi. Nice to meet you. So you're the Toshi Izuku talked about. Hitoshi stuck his hands in his pockets and leaned back against the wall, most likely in some sort of attempt at cool nonchalance. What he did not account for was the mysterious fluid on the floor. It was, apparently, quite slippery, as his feet were soon out from under him. Thanks to the small space of the closet, his flailing on the way down took Izuku with him, causing both boys to fall partially on top of a still-prone Natsuo. The white-haired teen let out a low oof at the impact. Toshi immediately scrambled off of him, muttering a string of apologies. Really slick, Toshi. Izuku smirked as he pushed himself up, but his remark caused the boy to kick his arm, sending him back to the floor. After thoroughly detangling their limbs and any newly stuck silk, the three stood in front of the closet door. Izuku tested the knob and... it was unlocked. Probably thought that silk would keep us contained. Nat shrugged. Yet another example of people too focused on their quirk. Locking it wouldn't have stopped us anyway. Toshi shrugged. Hear anyone, Izuku? Izuku pulled back from the door. Nope. All quiet. Let's go. They opened the door, emerging out into a wide, empty hallway. Not a soul was in sight. Look, Nat said, pointing to a sign on the wall. We're in the Mustafa Sports Arena. I've always wanted to go. Izuku eyed the colorful sign, advertising the different events occurring that month. He scanned it until he found... It's closed right now, Izuku said. No one should be here. We could probably just walk out. And they did. The 3 kidnapping victims simply sauntered through empty halls, and in no time, they'd walked out a side door and out onto the bustling street. Well, that was easy, Toshi mused. Izuku, on the other hand, pouted. Aw, it's already over. It doesn't have to be, Nat offered. You offering to kidnap us? Toshi teased, grinning lazily at the boy. I was thinking something more along the lines of ice cream. Nat pointed a thumb over to a store with a prominent ice cream sign. Izuku couldn't help it as he started to bounce up and down on his toes. Really? Now you've done it, Toshi groaned. Izuku loves ice cream almost as much as he loves heroes. Not true, Izuku huffed. Because it wasn't. While he did really like ice cream, he would gladly never eat ice cream again if he got to meet All Might. Sure, Toshi grinned. You definitely wouldn't let yourself get kidnapped for ice cream. Says the one who actually let themselves get kidnapped for a cookie. Toshi stuck his tongue out, and Izuku couldn't help but chuckle. Izuku laughed harder when Nat gave Toshi a pat on the back, causing him to stumble forward. Nat smiled. Come on, it doesn't matter who would sell their soul for ice cream and who would sell their soul for a cookie. I'm offering ice cream for the low, low price of free. He and Toshi cheered as they made their way over to the store. The cool shop air washed over him as they walked to the colorful tubs. Chocolate, mint chip, sakura, wasabi, cereal milk, chicken wing, octopus, bread? What weird novelty ice cream was this? Get what you want. It's courtesy of my asshat father. Nat pulled a silver card out of his jacket and placed it on the table with a clank. Izuku didn't know who Nat's father was, but if Nat didn't like him, Izuku would do his part by eating as much ice cream as humanly possible, adorning it with as many toppings as he could pack onto. And he thinks he did a pretty good job, walking out with the highest stacked cone he had ever seen. Despite Toshi's earlier teasing, he looked at his own tower of ice cream with wide eyes. And Nat was eating his cone like it was corn on the cob. Izuku wouldn't question the giver of ice cream. So we just gonna stand here awkwardly? Toshi asks as they stood on the sidewalk. Nat paused his munching. Now that's how to actually get kidnapped again. He paused for a second, his mangled ice cream stack coming to rest on his chin like a finger when in thought. I could show you guys the clinic I work at. It's not too far from here, though I doubt Ono would appreciate ice cream gyps on our lobby floor. We can finish it before we get there, Izuku chirped, immediately digging into his dairy monstrosity. Toshi chuckled. Plus ultra, I guess, he said before doing the same with his. They ate as they walked down increasingly dilapidated streets. Huge cracks marred the road to the point Izuku wasn't sure if cars could even drive down them anymore. Which was probably best, given the sidewalks had ceased to exist a couple blocks ago, so they were walking down the center of the street. Almost there, Nat smiled, steering the group down a certain alleyway. It would have been indistinguishable from any of the other dingy alleys, if not for the bright red brick nestled between sun-bleached stones. And as they entered the dark corridor, Izuku spotted a bright red door. This one was not boarded up like many of the others, instead, looking relatively well kept. Well, I see why it's called a Red Door Clinic now, Toshi said. Izuku nodded enthusiastically as he fit the last of his ice cream cone in his mouth.
Cheap as crust, Nat said. That was like 2 whole scoops plus the cone.
Izuku smiled. I really like ice cream.
That makes you able to unhinge your jaw like a snake? Nat asked, a little exasperated.
All that answered was silence. Well, lead the way, Nat, Toshi said, eyeing the door a little warily. Contrary to Izuku's expectations, the door opened without so much as a squeak. He poked his head in to see another door at the end of a hallway. This door, oddly enough, had a mirror in it. Izuku examined his ice cream-covered face and did his best to wipe it off. He'd even gotten it in his hair somehow. But before he could finish, the door swung open from the inside. There stood a middle-aged woman with purple tendrils of hair. Here for your shift already? The woman asked.
Kinda, the teen replied. I was in the area and I figured I'd show these two to the clinic because they've somehow never heard of one before. After we're done, I'll suit up.
The woman just nodded, walking to a weathered secretary-type desk on the left. On the right, there were a few mismatched chairs lined up against the wall like a doctor's waiting room. One of the chairs was occupied by a young adult with eyes like stained glass. As Izuku stared, he could pick up all the colors of the rainbow. Pretty, Izuku thought, and was startled when they spoke. Thanks, they said, a voice sweet and melodic. Izuku's eyes widened, tracing over their very clearly Quirk-influenced eyes. Do they read my mind? He thought, and again they responded. Yeah, it's my Quirk, they said. Hope you don't mind my villainous mind reading. Sarcasm as clear as their air quotes. Because I can't exactly turn it off. If I look into someone's eyes or they look into mine, I can read their mind. The only thought going through Izuku's mind was, cool! The person just smiled. Izuku tore his eyes away to look at Toshi, ready to unleash his Quirk theories, but stopped when he noticed the slight awe on his face. The purple-haired boy turned to Nat and, in a quiet voice, whispered, That's okay? That they're here and have a villainous Quirk? Nat smiled sadly. Of course, we don't discriminate here because we've all faced it in one form or another. Izuku was starting to really like this place. He grabbed Toshi and pulled him close, hands squishing his cheeks. Remember, there is no such thing as a villainous Quirk. Toshi blushed, pulling back, but nodded all the while. Friend reassured, Izuku turned his attention back to the clinic. It wasn't much to look at, either being barren or mismatched wherever he looked. There was a hallway with doors leading off of it that Izuku could only assume led to little doctors' offices or other medical rooms. Despite the unassuming nature from the outside, the hallway went on for quite a while, and a few people walked between rooms in a hurry. Walking up to the person at the desk, Izuku peered over the counter. An hour later, Izuku had squeezed them for all of their knowledge about the inner workings of the clinic. Toshi, meanwhile, talked to the rainbow-eyed person until they were called back for their checkup. It was nice talking with you, the receptionist, Ono, said. Izuku nodded with a smile. Maybe he could help out here too when he was old enough. It would be hard with how protective his mother was, but he might be able to sneak out at least every once in a while. But for now, it was getting late, and he really should go. Thanks for showing the clinic to us. It's so cool. I can't believe neither Toshi or I knew that this was a thing. Izuku chirped to Nat, who was getting ready for his shift. No problem, he said. Now you know where to go if you ever need medical help. I'll be sure to patch you right up. Izuku nodded. It was always fun to meet people on his kidnappings, but he didn't realize how important the connections could be. How else was he supposed to find someone who would buy him unlimited ice cream? In official documentation, Todoroki Natsuo is said to have a quirk, frost, mainly manifesting in cold hands. That is a lie. Well, not the cold hands, but that comes from his rain arts. The Quirk, on the other hand, turns out it's not too hard to get a forged Quirk if you throw enough money around, and his father has plenty of money. This act wasn't done out of care for his son, not wanting to see him discriminated against, in this oftentimes cruel world. This was because Endeavor didn't want to have him tarnish the family legacy with his extra toe joint. Because this part of him angered his father to no end, Natsuo loved it. He refused to wear the custom shoes his father tried to get for him, insisting on the standard Quirkless brand the rest of the people like him were forced to get. He made sure to educate himself from a young age on the history and struggles of his people, entrenched himself in the Quirkless community. Ever since he was 5 years old, Natsuo had been donating his birthday money, because, of course, his father couldn't bother to buy him a present, to things like Quirkless shelters. He knows he technically got lucky, having his status covered up, but he wouldn't leave his community out to dry. Speaking of which, since the first time Natsuo had heard about Red Door clinics, he knew what he wanted to do with his life. From the beginning, he had been overshadowed by his siblings. Toya, when he was still around, that is, and Shoto, destined to be heroes, and Fuyumi, who stepped up when Mom was taken away. His quirklessness didn't help him in that regard either. He'd known that he would always play a supporting role. He just didn't know which one. But being a doctor would help both his family and people like him. It'd taken a few years, despite the short-staffed nature of the Red Door clinics, for them to allow him to help. Even after he'd done some first aid courses, they wouldn't budge on the 13-year-old age requirement, and when he finally stepped up for his first shift, he understood why. While he wasn't exactly stitching people up, he saw the aftermath of some of the worst discrimination. He would be there to help people who could barely walk through the door and into an emergency room. He'd clean up after some bloody surgeries that barely saved a life. He'd even held someone's hand as they... He understood why they didn't let him help sooner, and it only made his resolve grow. The more stories he heard about people being illegally turned away from hospitals, the more he grew to appreciate the clinic's hard anti-discrimination policies. He was going to be a doctor, one who helped everyone. Just because the easy way out was there in his documentation and his father's money, he wouldn't take it. He still wore his red shoes, despite the number of kidnappings they've caused, because, better than anyone else, he can handle himself. Plus, if he did get kidnapped for real, his father would be forced to get him back or take a hit to his reputation. He worked long hours at the clinic for no pay, just wanting to help people. He was going to put himself through years of grueling schooling so he could help even more. Because out there, on the streets, in the clinic, he was just Nat. Not Endeavor's son, not a disgrace, not forgotten, just Nat. No one in that part of his life knew his connections to Endeavor, and no one in the other part of his life, school, home, knew the other part of his life. Well, except Shoto. Shoto is the only one left in his family he can freely talk smack about Endeavor with, which led Natsuo to sharing quite a few things with him. He's surprisingly good at keeping secrets when he wants to, so sharing his escapades outside of the house was natural when Shoto was cooped up all day, especially with how cool Shoto seemed to think they were. They got the opposite treatment. Shoto had every second of his day planned out and monitored, while Natsuo was free to roam the streets, even as a young child, because Endeavor wouldn't notice, nor care, that he was gone. Shoto heard about every funny kidnapping, weird story, or odd situation in the clinic, about Izuku and Toshi and all the others he met. And, unbeknownst to Natsuo, this being Shoto's only real glimpse into the outside world left him with an odd perception of the world. Oh well, I'm sure that won't cause any issues in the future. Yeah, no problems at all. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
it's not gonna mess up Shoto's, like, world belief, like, yes, people definitely get kidnapped all the time. This is very normal and natural. Don't worry about it. Anyway, yeah, it's fine. But I really love, like, Red Door Clinic stuff, Quirkless Clinic, whatever. Like, I've mentioned it quite a few times before. But yeah, I really love Quirkless clinics and all that stuff. Amazing. So I had to include it in this, like, series about Izuku being quirkless, even if that's mainly regarding the kidnappings. But yeah, and I really like the, like, quirkless not so thing. No idea if it's canon. Canon who cares if it is or it isn't, but it's just such a fun little thing, like, to have Todoroki's brother being quirkless. It's just nice. It's just, like, it's that little bit of spice. Yeah. So I wanted someone, I'm pretty sure, left a comment about, like, Natsuo, which inspired this chapter, and it was great. You know what else is great? All those ice cream flavors I described are real. Even the bread. I looked it up. That's where I got the bread from. I can't believe that's a real flavor. Why? Yeah. So, this is a bit of a longer one, which, oof, I had to record it in 2 different sessions because I don't have as much free time as I used to. But yeah, I'm happy to get this out there, and I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Why is it